Hi, welcome to Africa in Perspective. My name is Nelda and I make videos about Africa from Mondays to Fridays. Today we're going to be talking about how Europe underdeveloped Africa. Now, before we go anywhere, I just want to acknowledge the fact that I'm not blaming Europeans for Africa's underdevelopment. We have to be very clear on that. It would be the same as somebody on the personal level being like, oh yeah, I'm poor because of this person. No. What I'm saying is that the reason Africa is developing a little bit slower than we are supposed to be developing because of all the resources that we have, the reason Africa is developing very, very slowly has something to do with the systems that are in place. And those systems go all the way back to colonialism. Now, don't come for me and say, oh, yeah, African leaders are corrupt. Oh, yeah, Africans are lazy. Oh, there is a role that colonialism has to play in Africa's underdevelopment. If you believe that, stick around and we will go ahead and see why. If you don't believe that, this video is definitely for you. Because let me tell you something. Between 1500 and 1850, so between the beginning of the 16th century all the way towards the end of the 19th century, 12 million Africans were taken away from the continent. And that is just a conservative estimate, by the way. 10 to 20% of those 12 million died in the Middle Passage, which basically means when they were being packed in boats like tomatoes. Some of them died and they were thrown in the sea, and only 90-ish to 80% made it to the Americas. Now, those 12 million people that left the continent at that time, if they stayed in Africa, conservatively speaking, Africa would have had roughly 2.2 billion more people today. So that means we haven't even talked about the psychological effects of that, by the way. We're just talking about the pure analytical, like pure demographics here. Africa would have had 2.2 billion more people today if those 12 million people were not taken from the continent. So we lost not cheap labor per se. That's why Europeans wanted from Africa in the first place. But we lost manpower because when the Europeans were choosing slaves, they were not picking just regular people. They wanted the strongest in the community. They wanted smart people. They wanted people who could work in farms, people who could build their houses, people who could build their roads. So they took people who were strong, the strongest in our societies, and that depleted our own societies. We lost poets, we lost musicians, we lost future scientists, we lost a lot. Okay, so you cannot sit here and deny the fact that we lost a significant chunk of our people and they're in the Americas today and they're being treated like absolute crap. And that also has a psychological effect on us because our societies were disintegrated. There was this video that I saw on TikTok, by the way, and this lady, she was speaking a British accent. Not that I'm going to attempt a British accent, by the way, but she was saying something like, oh, we brought you sanitation. And she was essentially, she was essentially saying that colonialism wasn't all bad. There were some good things that came through. And I'm like, no. We had our own systems before colonialism happened. We had our own education systems, our own alphabets, although I know alphabet is typically the English alphabet, but we had our own letter systems. We had our own music. We had our own way of dressing, our own way of doing daily life, our own farming systems, our own government systems. So to this day, when people are saying, oh yeah, African leaders are so corrupt, African leaders are so corrupt, and I'm like, yes, they are. We're not going to take that away. But at the same time, one of the reasons, this is my actually, it's not a very humble opinion, it's a very prideful opinion because I think I know everything. According to my prideful opinion, one of the reasons Africa is developing very slowly and African leaders are struggling with the current government structures is because these government structures are not natural to Africans. We had our own ways. Every single community in Africa, we had our own ways. Most of them were monarchies, most of them were chiefdoms and kingdoms. And not that I'm saying we should go back to being kingdoms and chiefdoms. No. But what I'm saying is we have been forced into a system that doesn't work for us. And this system was not even set in place by us. African countries being republics, that is a new thing. African borders that exist today to divide African countries, those were not drawn by us. Do you know that Africa is the continent that leads in terms of civil conflicts? Why do you think that is happening? Because the borders that were drawn by us. They weren't. So all these things that happened during colonialism, they still are bleeding into the continent right now. We're still struggling to fix tribalism. We're still struggling to stop tiny little wars that are erupting here and there. When you hear about rebels killing people in Nigeria, there's a Christian genocide. When you hear about a conflict, is again M23 rebels in the DRC. When you hear the same thing, rebels in South Sudan, they're everywhere. They're popping up. Xenophobia in South Africa. All these issues. When we were living in our little tribes, in our little tiny little kingdoms, we were very happy. We're very happy. Were we fighting? Yes, once in a while. Did we also have slaves amongst ourselves? Yes, we did. But you cannot compare the scale of the slavery that was happening within the continent to the kind of slavery that happened particularly with the transatlantic slave trade. Like that happened for 400 years, guys. 400 years. So while I'm the type of person to be very strict and to say, oh yeah, there are many reasons Africa is underdeveloped, or shouldn't just blame colonialism, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, but it kind of did contribute. You know what I mean? It kind of did. So let's not sit here and pretend as if Africa's underdevelopment is purely Africa's fault. But at the same time, I want to address this very, very clearly. At the same time, what I want to really insist here is that even though Africa's colonialism and slavery and the pain that we carry as a people, even though all of that had nothing to do with us, we still need to take responsibility to fix ourselves. You know that clip that was going around on TikTok where this lady was like, nobody is coming to save you. That is literally the same thing with Africa. Nobody's coming to save us. So I agree that with the fact that Europe plays a very big role in underdeveloping Africa. They still are taking away our resources. We're not industrialized. They didn't set up that system of industrialization. And even when they did, they set it up to serve themselves. So now Africa is serving Europe. We are sending away raw materials. They're manufacturing stuff for us, and then we're importing back manufactured goods. That needs to stop immediately. So even though, like I was saying previously, even though Africa is not responsible for Africa's pains, we are still the ones who are responsible for fixing them. It is not our fault that we're the poorest continent in the world, but it is our responsibility to make sure that we're not the poorest continent in the world. We need to acknowledge this. When you're talking about Africa's underdevelopment, we cannot just say, oh, it's not colonialism. No, no, no. Colonialism has a role to play in this. It does. We were enslaved, we were mistreated, and we deserve to feel that pain. However, we're not supposed to let that pain just be the one thing we talk about all the time. We need to say, okay, yeah, that happened to us in the past, but what do we do now? How do we move forward as a people? How do we fix our own government systems? Sure, are we going to stay democratic? I support democracy all the way. And when I become president of Tanzania, I promise I'll be very democratic, guys, I promise. But even though we're going to keep up with democracy, how do we tweak it to our own people to make sure it works for us? So, for example, democracy is all about the rule of the majority, but there's a minority representing the majority. But I'm not going to say what country, but there are so many countries that do not have parliaments, and they're doing very well. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say, and I'm going to end the video before people start calling me a dictator. But thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was very helpful, because I feel like people are not talking enough about the fact that colonialism has a role to play, and Europe has a big role to play in developing Africa. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe. I'm on the road to 300 subscribers, and I hope you will see me in the next video. Bye.